Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
As a broadcast journalist, I've spent my life traveling the world and made my living interviewing the greatest fighters of all time. Until this day, I talk to the greatest fighters and thinkers about their fight. I'm Radio Raheem. Till this day. Follow Till This Day to stay in the fight.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
This is a Shares for Beginners quick tip. Essential lessons, questions answered. Tony Kynaston is a successful professional investor and is one half of the QAV podcast. Many beginner investors often have no idea where to start when investing in the share market and don't realise how important it is to have a checklist when buying and selling. In this quick tip, Tony explains how he came to create his checklist.
When you moved from doing all those penny dreadfuls all those years ago, how long did it take you to get from that point to this finalised checklist?
Good question. I mean, I only had a formal checklist probably in the last 5 to 7 years, and that's because I read a book called The Checklist Manifesto, which came out, and it was basically written by a doctor, and he said, why are we making mistakes in surgeries? And he said, well, is there an industry I can look at which doesn't make as many mistakes? And he thought the airline industry. And if you're a pilot on a plane, you have a checklist and you roll through it, and you don't take the plane doesn't take off unless everything ticks all the boxes. And the surgeon brought that into his hospital, and that improved
outcomes.
Yeah, there was less botched surgery procedures, and so that's when I started doing the same thing with my investing, and I think it's helped a lot too. But the concepts underneath it, I think, were always there. And I've got to also say the checklist is evolving. It's not set in stone. I'm always sort of thinking to myself, well, yeah, should I buy something on the way down? Is that better off than waiting for it to trend up, and you might miss the first 20 or 30% of that uptick? One thing I would recommend to people is just read all the time about investing or about related things. So if I come across something else which strikes me as being a good way to invest, I might add that to the checklist.
Shares for Beginners is for information and educational purposes only. It isn't financial advice, and you shouldn't buy or sell any investments based on what you've heard here. Any opinion or commentary is the view of the speaker only, not Shares for Beginners. This podcast doesn't replace professional advice regarding your personal financial needs, circumstances, or current situation.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
As a broadcast journalist, I've spent my life traveling the world and made my living interviewing the greatest fighters of all time. Until this day, I talk to the greatest fighters and thinkers about their fight. I'm Radio Raheem. Till this day. Follow Till This Day to stay in the fight.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.